all those things that we already knew were bad, now we're revisiting today and saying also that they're bad, but we've already known this for ages. We actually had laws against it, and we failed to transfer them over. But like, we don't have to continue doing that. We could put the onus on advertisers and platform owners, on media creators and like media generators. If they're just going to generate it, put them on the hot seat for making sure that the stuff that kids are seeing or that there's targeted to kids isn't filled with things that are going to be exploitative or harmful. And it's shocking, to think of how slow we've been to think about like something like YouTube as a media broadcaster. Why don't we think that? It's because so many people can distribute. But, now we have the technology, and this is like a great application of AI where we can actually like make demands to keep track of this stuff better and, have an expectation that it's going to potentially happen. It's got to be easier than regulating a third of the internet's users who are under 18 for every behavior and everything that they download and do. Like, how could that possibly be the easiest and best way to solve these problems?
You are listening to CEO
My guest is Professor Sara Grimes, a prominent scholar and world-leading expert in children's digital media, culture, rights and play. Her research examines the intersection of technology, commercialization and childhood, with a particular focus on digital games and virtual worlds. She is particularly focused on children's rights, advocating for privacy, freedom of expression and protection from violence in digital spaces. She is also the author of the award-winning book, Digital Playgrounds: The Hidden Politics of Children's Online Play Spaces, Virtual Worlds and Connected Games.
Okay, guys, I need a very big favor from you. If you are watching on YouTube, please make sure you hit the subscribe button, because that makes a massive difference for our podcast. It literally costs you nothing other than a split-second click. But if you're also watching or listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, make sure that you give us a follow there. But in order for it to count, you also need to leave us a review. Please feel free to give us whatever review you think that it's fair, but it's important that you do, because otherwise they don't count your following. Why? I have no idea, but that's just how it is. So I'll really, really appreciate it if you do that. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the episode. Sara, welcome to round 2. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. Like, it's been a year since you and I had a chat, and it feels like 10 years, isn't it? Because I just mentioned before we recorded that I think we recorded just after Trump's election. And he wasn't in office yet. We were speculating at the time how much worse things could get, especially from the point of view of children's rights online, children's rights online, privacy, ethics in tech, etc. And it's been horrendous for me for the past year. But how are you doing? How was your year since our last conversation?
Yeah, I mean, tumultuous, I guess, in terms of children's rights in the online space. It's not been as dramatically like reverse everything as like maybe I was fearing at the time. I'm not sure anymore how I felt, because you're right. It seems like 10 years ago. And no matter what I was thinking, I'm sure I underestimated how bad things were going to get. Because, as a rational person, that's like what you would have done. But I guess there's still some possibilities. So it could be worse. In terms of what's happening in the States, it's definitely headed in a bad direction for regulation and protecting children's rights. But it's also very varied in terms of what's going on in different areas and different states and how different companies are responding. So it's also not like this monolithic, movement towards deregulation. Far from it. So it's been really hard to keep up with. I read the news every day, and I always have, but now I read the news every day and there's like a story that relates directly to my work, which is a different type of experience, I have to say. And it feels like I'm always just kind of running to keep up with things and trying to find out what's going to happen next. 'Cause it's really impossible to predict, what's going to happen next at this point.
Yeah. And actually, for the listeners, you guys should check out my conversation with Sara a year ago, because then we actually delved more into Sara's work so you'll understand why. I mean, she's just a leading world expert when it comes to anything to do with privacy, children's rights online. And it's like, yeah, she is the person to listen to and follow. So please check out that conversation and follow her on LinkedIn. I'm like, I hope I'm not bothering you on LinkedIn, because I always tag your name every 5 minutes everywhere.
No, not at all. I love being part of the conversation. And I also really appreciate hearing the other people that you're talking to, and it really rounds out my knowledge of all these other areas too. So I love that.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing that I found in the last year, because going back to our conversation a year ago, because we talked about how generally the big tech really ignored children's rights online, right? To an extent that you highlighted that even algorithms, they can't even identify what the child even looks like. I mean, there's no understanding, and people kind of need to understand that AI has zero understanding. It can't say, oh, it's a child, it's a boy, it's a girl, it's a woman, that it doesn't work like that. Like, life would have been easy if that was the case. But for me, the thing that I found that is worse is the fact that they didn't necessarily deregulate, but they just allowed the regulations not to apply anymore. Like, for example, what we've seen with X, with Grok AI, and of course we've seen character AI, just to name a few examples. It's the fact that the regulators can't take any action anymore. So people can just do whatever the hell they want to do with AI online. They can breach all different laws. And of course, in the case of, in my view, what Grok AI and deepfakes, it's CSAM. For me, that's a violation of CSAM laws, which is a prosecutable offense from my understanding. But nope, nothing's happening. So for me, I think that's the problem. It's that the regulators can't enforce whatever regulations that, they were already pretty weak, but the fact that even these weak regulations can't be enforced, effectively, it's just a free for all right now, isn't it?
Yeah, in the United States, it really seems to be that way. I mean, there's also been massive shifts in who's in charge of these, departments and regulatory bodies, so that it's people who aren't interested in learning the laws, let alone applying them. And not to overgeneralize, but definitely like some of the key regulatory bodies that could be acting are not, or they're not acting in any way that we can see. I mean, it seems right now what's been happening with Grok in particular, it has to do with consumer backlash more than it has to do with any enforcement of regulations. And you're completely right. Like, what we're seeing is illegal, and it's shocking that there can be any perceived loophole or wiggle room with that, when it's so like clearly established, and also such a cultural norm. Like, this isn't a law that has like a lot of controversy around it. This is a law that the vast majority of people are firmly behind. Yes, CSAM should be illegal. It is illegal. It's horrible, and it needs to be stopped. And yet, we're seeing these events happen, and a real testing of the waters to see what the public will put up with, I guess, and how far they can push this idea that everything is subjective and up for debate and, a matter of free speech. And they're testing it with a lot of different issues. I think they finally came up against one where there was enough blowback from the public, from people, that they had to act. But yeah, and there's a lot of other cases where that's not happening. And why should it be up to us to be outraged to enforce laws? Like, that's, loud rule here.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think as we even see it with the Epstein file releases, which is something that I put a lot of attention on this podcast about, because it's the same people. If you think about it, right? It's as Senator O'Connor described it as the Epstein class. So effectively, the people that are running the big tech are the Epstein class. The regulators that you mentioned, who are in control of these regulations, are part of the Epstein class. It's like, okay, that's a problem. And it's kind of like what they've done with the Epstein data dump. It's like, for me, I'm like, why are they throwing all the data out there so that everybody can have a look? It's like, what, is it our job to dig through all the dirt? So what's the point of the FBI? What's the point of the police? It's ridiculous. But again, the public reaction is quite clear. You know, they're very much shocked and horrified by what's going on out there. So, I mean, it's chaotic. But at the same time, I try to be positive in the sense that I think now people are seeing what is going on. And as you said, because there's a public backlash, this is the reason why we exist, because we want to inform the public so that people understand, you know, what rights they have. But I think that, I mean, do you think that could, well, outside the US seems to have made an impact. Actually, we'll come back to that. But do you think in the US that could actually somehow change the regulatory framework somehow, that if people basically rise up? I mean, I personally can't see it with Trump. I mean, he doesn't care, it seems.
Yeah. And I think there's just so many mechanisms that are in place right now to isolate, public reaction from like actual consequences for any of these companies or any of these like powerful elites. Like, it has to do with the ever-changing news cycle. You know, we're mad at this person today, and now something even more atrocious has happened tomorrow, and you know, we're kind of, as a public, not united, and we're not able to like coherently and consistently follow a story to see what actually ends up happening, which I think is not an accident. I mean, it's also just a flailing, you know, display of incompetency and kind of cruelty. So there's that, but it's also this idea of changing the narrative. I think this administration is really good at that. Always in a new state of shock and awe, appalled awe at what's happening. And so, yeah, will that translate into action? Even people who are fired are often rehired. You know, even those very small consequences seem to be overturned pretty easily. So it's hard to say. I think one of the places where there is possibility of action is at the state level. And, it's a patchwork in the United States in terms of what's under state control and what's under federal control. But the good thing, I guess, for at least the states that are interested in doing things differently from how things are headed generally, there is still a lot of control at the state level. So there are a lot of things that they can do. Will they then be challenged and overturned by Supreme Court or the FTC? That's always a possibility, but at least then the fight becomes more visible and then the side becomes better articulated, I think.
So are there any particular states that you're watching that you feel that actually they are doing something that could be impactful? I mean, California, I guess, but
California is always the one. Yeah, but they're not the only ones. But they're a very powerful state. So I think it's also, we pay attention to what they're doing. It's also the state where a lot of the tech giants have their headquarters, as well as the media, right? Mass media and like film and television and a lot of video game companies. So it's also a place where there's a large population. They make a lot of money for the country. And they also directly impact a lot of the companies that are the big, powerful players in this realm.
And how is it impacting Canada? Because now, obviously, with Carney, he completely, I mean, he's kind of like the hero here in the UK amongst the people, because we're saying we need Starmer to become like Carney, right? But I think Brexit Britain, we've become such a vassal state that I don't know if we can afford it. But we probably, if we're part of the EU, we could have done it. But anyway, that's a different dimension, I guess. But I'm interested to know also in terms of Canada, because of course, Canadian tech is so closely connected with the American tech. Like so much so, for example, TikTok USA is effectively also Canadian TikTok. So now you guys are under, if you're using TikTok in America or in Canada, basically you are under unfortunate control of Larry Ellison. So thankfully we in Europe and the UK, we're out of that. So I'm just wondering what actions is the Canadian government taking any action in a way? Because like for you, it's tricky, I think, isn't it?
It is tricky. It's very tricky. And I think that public opinion is weirdly split on a lot of, not these dramatic issues that we've been discussing so far, but things like social media, should it be banned for, kids under 13 or under 16 or whatever. And there's a lot of kind of like swaying back and forth. What I'm hearing in the policy, ecosystem is there's heavy interest in bringing something in like what they have in Australia, but not a lot of, not like a clear plan for how that would work and what would be included. They're still collecting evidence to some extent. There's an online harms bill that almost passed before we had our change in government that had like multi-party support. And it had like a lot of support of the public as well. That was more focused on regulating and making it easier for law enforcement to go after crimes that were being committed online. So it was really just about translating, we have all these things that are illegal in the real world. Like a 30-year-old man isn't allowed to approach a 12-year-old girl and start harassing her, or cyberbullying all the way to predation. None of these things are allowed. How do we make it easier to enforce those laws in the online space? So that was really focused on not just coming after the companies. There were rules and stuff that Facebook and different social media would have to now implement in terms of like monitoring and reporting, but also in terms of the actual bad actors, right? So the people who are using those platforms to do horrible things. So like you can probably tell even the way that I'm describing it, like it was like a pretty reasonable piece of legislation. What will happen with that? Some people are talking about bringing that one back, maybe adding, because it had been written quite a while ago before the advent of chatbots and, before the spread and sophistication of chatbots, I should say. So that's a possibility. And then, there's also still people who are thinking about, maybe children's rights should be part of this conversation as well. And maybe we should start looking at something like the age-appropriate design code for privacy and maybe for other elements of regulation. So it feels like a moment where we're in flux with a heavy focus on these age bands because they get a lot of attention. They're being heralded as a success in Australia, even though that's like very premature. They just implemented them. I have heard very contradictory information about how well they're actually working. Definitely young people themselves are not generally fans, and parents are also finding it hard. There's a big push towards darker spaces that aren't part of the ban, as a result, and a lot of negative consequences. But it gets a lot of attention, and it can make it seem like a government is doing something, and I think that for some regulators, that's enough. Whether it actually works or not, maybe even be secondary to the, great display of action that comes out of doing something that traumatic. So yeah, we'll see what happens. It's I feel like I feel like I'm writing every day and just trying to put together evidence and get it to the right people to prevent something that's going to be one of those Band-Aid solutions that are so extremely ill tested, ill thought out, with very little, if any, evidence to back it up, in favor of something that's more considered and more rights based. But it's also hard to know. It's hard to know what's going to happen. It really depends on, I think, what the government thinks the people will respond best to in that moment, which is a terrible way to develop policy, frankly.
Yeah, well, it's all about politics, isn't it? It's like it's point scoring, what attracts the headlines, etc. And Australia absolutely is like, yeah, it's the same here in the UK. I mean, the government, of course, now is reacting to what we've seen with Grok again, and I sympathise with the reaction. I think everybody should be shocked, but as soon as they started saying, "Look, they've done it in Australia, we might do the same thing," I fundamentally disagree with what Australia did, because to me, a ban is not really solving the problem. It's like, how does banning children from accessing Grok stops the creeps using Grok to nudify children? I mean, that's not the problem. Children shouldn't have access to that. But how about actually going directly, which is what the French and the Spanish have done, raid the offices of X and say, hey, what are you playing at? Okay. And I'm thinking, it's a completely different thing. I mean, because in China, for example, not that I support the Chinese approach to doing things, but there's a reason why TikTok is safer in China than it is in the West, because the law says, no, don't push garbage at children, right? So children can access it, but make sure you control it. Like you, as in the platform owner, make sure you control the content. What's the point of all this fancy AI nonsense if you can't control the content? But that's the thing. But in here, they're kind of masquerading it as freedom of speech, which is complete bullshit. I mean, nudifying women and children is not freedom of speech. And you see me on LinkedIn, I kind of rant at people, but some people going about, it's like being in the public, what's the term, the stupid term that Musk uses, that it's the public square. And I'm like, right. Last time I checked, in public square, you don't just approach people with racial slurs or try to nudify women on public square. You get arrested either way. So it's complete nonsense. So I fundamentally disagree with the ban. I think it's just, to me, it deprives children from accessing technology that is actually good for them, generally speaking. Like in here, I've seen murmurs as well. I don't know if it's true, but I think this is even more insane. Because the argument that some parents are making, that their kids know how to use VPNs so they can bypass the access and so on. Well, now they're thinking about banning children from using VPNs. I'm like, but VPNs are also useful for cybersecurity. What the hell are you talking about? And I'm thinking, guys, just go after the CEOs. They will pay attention then. But apparently they're not particularly interested in that, or they probably don't know how to do it. I don't know. But that's my view. I mean, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree. The real problem are the people who are doing the bad things and the tools that are, just making it so easy to use and display it. So, someone wants to do horrible, illegal things in their own home. Eventually, hopefully, they'll get caught. But the fact is that they're using platforms and spreading it to the whole world. So it's not like this personal thing that they're doing. They're contributing to a public sphere. They're contributing to a public culture, a shared space. And we absolutely have laws on what people are allowed to do and say in shared spaces. We also don't generally exclude people based on their age or their race or their gender from participating in public life. With some exceptions. Kids aren't allowed to vote generally. So there's elements, and they're not allowed to go to bars in Canada and most places. So there are places that are carved out as adult only, or that are carved out as only for people who have reached the age of majority. And that's, I think, different. Those are all, they have like established rationales, many years of evidence that drinking alcohol is very bad for children. Like there's reasons for it that are beyond just, we can't control how people are acting, and so we're going to punish kids and prevent them from being here. That as a rationale for exclusion to participate in a whole swath of cultural moments, engage in platforms where in many areas of the world, it's like where people get the most of their news. It's like their number one source of the news. And so we're going to ban young people from accessing the news. Is that really the solution? I don't think so either. I think regulating the way that the companies operate their platforms and making them more responsible for monitoring and policing and working with actual law enforcement also, right? Instead of always hiding and segmenting and kind of like shadow banning content that's like most likely illegal. How about reporting? How about coordinating? How about using some of these extremely sophisticated technologies to actually like start like shutting down the bad behavior instead of shutting down the places that people enjoy congregating and sharing pictures of their cats. Why is that the threat? Why is that the threat?
Well, one of the conspiracies that I'm seeing around, although I don't know if it's a conspiracy or not, but part of the idea, the arguments that some people are making, that they want to shut down access to young kids because they're the ones that they see the news for what it is. So, for example, when they see the genocide in Gaza, they TikTok kind of allowed it, of course, to spread, etc. And of course, Larry Ellison is not allowing that anymore. So now they're basically using the Chinese approach to banning certain content. So much for freedom of speech. I mean, that's just one example. But I have seen arguments where people feel that actually this is just a nice excuse to keep children and young people in the dark, because they know that that's the only way they consume news. They don't consume news on the BBC or anything like that. So, I mean, I don't know if that's true, but I just find it like an interesting coincidence that the very people who are basically in control of America's freedom of speech are the ones that kind of try to lecture us about freedom of speech. Yeah, they're doing exactly what China is doing, what other authoritarian governments are doing when it comes to preventing access to information.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think oftentimes they only care about their own personal freedom of speech, not others.
Exactly.
Yeah, oh, yes. I think that there's some interesting parallels also. We'll talk about the States a little bit more in terms of the revision of school curriculum to efface swaths of history, entire people, in Florida, where you're not even allowed to acknowledge that gay people exist at school, all the way to book bannings and, how far away are we from book burnings? So I think you're right in terms of controlling information and controlling access and kind of keeping people in the dark ages. It's not the very loose and free circulation of false information, clearly AI generated videos, just the fake news claims constantly, also saying things like people in positions of authority, people with, who are lawyers, people who are supposed to be trusted experts and trusted to tell the truth, lying just daily. And what that does in terms of young people's, but all people's sense of what's real, who can you trust, how do I know? and it creates like so much insecurity around that. It feels like everybody's lying. And when everybody's lying, then it's just about feelings and vibes. But that's really a devious kind of like, it's similar to the Dark Ages and what that was all about, making sure people aren't reading and accessing information so that they're more easily manipulated by charismatic, monarchs or religious figures. It's a similar type of thing in terms of like amplifying ignorance. So cutting off access to others, cutting off access to information, and then even degrading the quality of education in schools and what's available in libraries. It's all coming from the same side, political side, in the United States. It's coming from different parties and different people and groups in different countries where that, ethos, that ideology is not in charge. So it's a little bit more fringe, like in a place like Canada. It's not... Our government isn't like that, but there are factions. There's a province that's bringing in similar types of rules. So it's not disconnected. It is connected, not in a conspiracy theory way. I think even in some of their strategic plans, it's outlined, right? So yeah.
Well, I did an episode with Scott Lucas, and because we looked at a couple of examples of Epstein emails, and there was one that I shared at the time, so I can't remember the top of my head, but basically it was between Peter Thiel, obviously the CEO of Palantir, and of course a big player in the world of AI, and Epstein. And I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but Epstein basically said something along the lines, Brexit was a success, that's great. And Peter Thiel was like, how so? And he was like, well, we created new alliances. We basically opened up new opportunities. We've changed the narratives. And basically now we found a way to be able to achieve change effectively through breaking things rather than building things, which is basically the typical disaster capitalist type statement. But effectively, when you see what happened in Brexit, of course, with MAGA, etc., it is exactly that. But you can see, again, going back to the Epstein class, that was their plan. And it's not a conspiracy, but it was more like, okay, well, how do we gain more power, more control, more money? It's all about the money, really. How do we do that? Oh, okay, let's create chaos, because with that we can actually do whatever the hell we like. So effectively, that's what they've done. It's not a conspiracy. It's just a chaos. They thought, hey, we've maximized our cash. How can we get more? Boom. And here we are.
Yes. Yeah. There's this trio of UK researchers. They all research political movements and media that I talked to a few years ago that really opened my eyes about the alt-right and kind of like these right-wing movements as being largely about breaking it down, not because there's a clear plan for building something new, but just about destroying it all. Like that it's really the main focus and the main goal is to, burn it all to the ground. And like there's different interpretations of that, of course. And some groups might think, oh, if society collapses, I'm really strong and I have many guns, so I'll be able to take over. So like, there are surely people who have some sort of fantasy plan, but the more common kind of like denominator, like the thing that links all these people together, is really more about destroying. So yeah, you're completely right. And it's interesting how that logic really overlaps so clearly with like reactionary politics, right?
Yes.
It's the goals in the short term and kind of like in a sense the long term are the same. Although I think that for a lot of the people who are on the reactionary politics side and have no capital power in the current moment, they also imagine that that will destroy the money holders, right? The power holders. Where what we're seeing is like the exact opposite. And the billionaires are now becoming trillionaires. And, you know, things are getting broken down in order to funnel more resources towards those who already have so much.
Well, the interesting thing about the Epstein, because I keep going back to the Epstein, because it's such a revelation. Actually, I think it's definitely a historic moment, because the very elites who go on about that they're very anti-elite, you know, like Trump was going on about, oh, I'm anti-establishment, etc. Well, it turns out, thanks to the Epstein files, they are the establishment. They are the elites that they hate. So either they hate themselves or they've been lying, you know. So I think I know which one that is. But again, and that kind of made me think also, is that where Mark Zuckerberg got his infamous statement of moving fast and breaking things? Or that's the Silicon Valley approach, which is like I say, it's a fascinating revelation, really. It's all connected.
It is, yeah, and this glorification of destruction that we've kind of, you know, been really normalizing for 20 years plus. Yeah, that's an interesting link. Yeah.
And going back to the children, because you mentioned that effectively, because they don't have access, like what we've seen with Florida, that effectively they try to rewrite history, they try to rewrite education, but the other thing that I saw today as well, because at the time of the recording, Jesse Jackson passed away, and one of his mentees, Lord Simon Woolley, somebody who I will try to get him into the podcast, is a great character actually, but he made a point that basically people online, they think that the rise of misogyny, the rise of racism, because we are seeing rise of misogyny, rise of racism in a way. I mean, I'm approaching 50. I haven't seen that in the 90s or 80s. And these were the periods where, you know, gay jokes were a thing, right? And all of that stuff. But it's a hell of a lot worse right now. Much, much worse. And he made a point that because people have access to all this pretty horrendous information online, misinformation, etc., they think, the younger generation think that it's always been like that. Because
Right.
he says that because he does loads of like events with young people, because he's I can't remember, is he a chancellor of one of Oxbridge universities? I forgot which one. But he basically made the point that, like in the interview today, that the children, or rather the young people at universities, are surprised when he tells them that what you see today, that's not normal, because 10 years ago, that was not a thing. Andrew Tate was not popular 10 years ago. He would not have been popular 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So the fact that now suddenly he's popular, the fact that now, you know, somebody like Trump says that he wants to grab women by, you know, their private parts. It's locker room talk, which is like,
Yeah.
I've been in locker rooms as an ex-pro athlete in the 90s amongst testosterone-driven men. We never said things like that. We said a lot of things, but never, nothing like that. So it's not normal. But I think you made a point here, like that because the more they restrict young people from accessing online spaces, and then whatever they access is all filled up with misinformation that is controlled by the likes of Larry Ellison and the MAGA movement, and of course the far right in Europe. Effectively, they are normalizing. You know, it's propaganda now. It's like the whole internet is somehow turned into a propaganda machine for the far right. And that's not a political statement. This is literally what's happening.
Yes. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, that's a really interesting comment. I think he's probably right. At least among like a majority, you know, of youth who are kind of encountering history in a more kind of like partial way, aren't delving deeply. But even if you are a student of history, you see all the horrible things, right? And you also are aware of a couple of tendencies that we experienced in the 90s of kind of effacing inequity and ignoring the sexism that did exist, and the racism that did exist, because it wasn't as bad as, we thought before. And so we were making progress. And I completely agree. The way that people talk, the idea that Andrew Tate could be popular at all, let alone among kids, is completely shocking. There's no chance that, that could have happened 30 years ago. It would have been like completely unheard of. All the parents and grandparents and teachers and everyone would have freaked out so much. This guy would have been like taken off the air. That would have been it. And I completely agree that there was these norms and standards, but there was also a tendency to pretend, that racism didn't exist, that, sexism wasn't still a huge problem. And I think that a lot of young people today are aware of that too, that, there was a kind of like a willing turning a blind eye to disparities and inequities that was happening then, that they're more savvy to, but they're kind of like not appreciative of like what that all resulted in and how we lived our lives, that when I was growing up, I really felt like I could be anything. Like I really felt that way. And it's true that at that same moment, women were still making way less than men for the same job with the same work experience. And there was still massive inequity in terms of salary and opportunities. Because even all of that time that I thought I could become anything, it wasn't true that every single industry was giving those actual opportunities to those girls when they grew up and went to university and applied for jobs. But it felt like that. And that feeling is really, that felt very much like progress. And I don't see that for the kids today. I don't see them having those feelings. They're very aware of systemic inequities, structural racism, the sexism that's like, just like we just can't seem to get like, gender parity and equity in pay. Why? Why is that? Why does that continue? Even at a university full of woke people, it still happens. It's still happening.
Yeah.
So they're aware of all of that and that history. And that's very heavy, and an awareness of those underlying things that maybe we weren't always savvy to as young people, coming out in the world. We're going to do all these things. It's going to be so great. And became disenchanted later, right? And encountered these things and, maybe tried to change them. As I think we are both people who have been trying to change those things. But for them, I think it's much more, I don't know, it seems more like the history of this whole thing has always been filled with bad stuff. And for a long time, people were pretending that the bad stuff didn't exist. And so I agree that it's worse, but I also think that young people today are also kind of like more cynical. They're more cynical about the possibility of moving past and whether we ever really were. So they don't understand that we had that. Because it seems so impossible.
Not to mention, of course, like because of Trump, it's like this whole anti-DEI nonsense. It's like to an extent that now they're saying, and I'm not suggesting that this problem doesn't exist before people start getting upset with me, but this whole idea that men are the victims now as well.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, what? And it's nonsensical to me. But it is definitely, because there's a rise, and this is something I haven't seen enough of. I mean, I've seen one report that was published a year ago, that in the same way that we see the rise of the manosphere, there's a femisphere. So you gotta like with sort of young girls' reaction to that. And the main reason I'm thinking about this, about point you just made, that they have this really high level of skepticism against the system. So we're seeing this situation that you've got young men that think, okay, the system is against us. It's all women's fault. And obviously young women, they know the score already. They say, okay, well, actually the system is getting worse for women. okay, now we need to kind of isolate, or even like, well, the femisphere specifically, they're kind of moving in a very strange direction that basically they expect men to look after them. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of, so collectively we're kind of moving back into the 50s, it seems, from that perspective, which is crazy, I think. Which kind of brings me back to the bans, because I suppose that this highlights the complexity of the internet, and some people say, well, that's why we should ban access to the internet, so that people can understand the reality. But then who's teaching them? If the schools aren't doing a great job, and we talked about that in our last discussion as well,
right.
The government is not doing a great job in educating people. So again, I can't see how banning would make things any better. I mean, I think still, again, in my view, that if governments would start saying, okay, look, we need to clean up the web. I mean, I think the example that somebody used, I mean, years ago, to control or rather regulate social media, is that we treat them as publishers. Like news publishers, there's certain standards that they have to follow. But for whatever reason, like they managed, the lobbyists, I guess, of Facebook and the like, they managed to convince government that's actually, no, they're not like publishers. It's freedom of speech, where we give users freedom of speech, etc. And I'm thinking, from your point of view, do you think now that could be the right time to say, well, actually, guys, you had 10, 15 years to play. We could see that this is basically ain't working. We need to put some limitations. So you guys, as of now, you're going to be treated like publishers. So you're responsible for whatever is being published online. I mean, could that work, do you think?
I think so. I mean, the discursive move, you call yourself a social network. You're just like providing a space for people to do things. Social media. I am now streaming games and movies, and I am, manipulating what everyone sees and what appears through algorithms, and adding a bunch of AI generated things, and prioritizing advertisers who are paying me for advertising time. They kind of did it to themselves. They turned themselves into broadcasters or publishers. And wouldn't that be great? I wrote a paper like 20 years ago about how so it was looking at advertising to kids online, and how so many of the practices even then just broke the existing rules about what you were allowed to do in advertising that's targeted to children, that had been applied to, TV predominantly. There was a ton of rules about that, but also magazines and other traditional media. There were all kinds of rules, like you weren't allowed, if you were the host of a show, you weren't allowed to peddle a product that you were getting paid to peddle. Can you even imagine? Like, there was basically influencers. They're like, you're not allowed, influencers aren't allowed to target children. And in moments where you had to be really overt that you were being paid to promote something. And my whole paper as this young, idealistic, optimistic scholar was, these rules already actually exist. We just need to apply them here. The exact same, all the things that we already know are bad and deceptive and unfair and take advantage of kids because they don't, they're not savvy to the ways of the marketing world, or they have like a tendency to trust the characters in their shows. All those things that we already knew were bad. Now we're revisiting today and saying also that they're bad, but we've already known this for ages. We actually had laws against it, and we failed to transfer them over. But like, we don't have to continue doing that. We could put the onus on advertisers and platform owners, on media creators and like media generators. If they're just going to generate it, put them on the hot seat for making sure that the stuff that kids are seeing, or that there's targeted to kids, isn't filled with things that are going to be exploitative or harmful. And it's shocking, to think of how slow we've been to think about like something like YouTube as a media broadcaster, why don't we think that? It's because so many people can distribute. But, now we have the technology, and this is like a great application of AI where we can actually like make demands to keep track of this stuff better and, have an expectation that it's going to potentially happen. It's got to be easier than regulating a third of the internet's users who are under 18 for every behavior and everything that they download and do. Like, how could that possibly be the easiest and best way to solve these problems?
Well, again, going back to politics, it's easier for them to tap themselves on the shoulder, say, hey, look, we did something, and the public reacts, yay, they did something, but actually it's not working.
And we targeted people who can't vote yet. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, train them first. Yeah. Brainwash them a little bit before they start voting so that they vote the right way, as Trump says. But out of interest, because you mentioned earlier that in Australia, of course, it's still too early, but you have started noticing some contradictory arguments about whether it's working or it's not working. So can you share anything with us in terms of what is happening in Australia right now? It's like, what is the ban working, or are there any consequences from that ban that nobody foresaw?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone has the rigorous study yet, although there are people who are, of course, studying it to see, how is this playing out in households? Where are young people going instead of the social media that they've been banned from? Because it's not as though Australia banned everyone under 16 from the entire internet. They're still on all kinds of different platforms and websites and doing all kinds of things. So what are they doing instead? And where are they heading? So far, what I've been reading are kind of more anecdotal, observations from scholars cited in news stories and blog posts of people who are doing that research, kind of like what are their preliminary findings. And they're finding exactly what you'd expect. A great number of families are adhering to these rules and they are doing their best. And some of the kids are like, hey, I actually don't mind not being on Instagram anymore because it was kind of bumming me out. And now I'm doing things with my friends more. It's fun. So you have that. And that's always to be expected because a lot of times we do things just because we're in a habit or a rut. It's not even necessarily something that we want to do constantly. And so when our paradigm is shifted and we get, an excuse to do things differently or see people more, we do. And that's fun. That's great. It's like post-COVID, how much socializing we all did. But there are also kids who are going to dark web. There are kids who are spending a lot more time on completely unsupervised spaces that aren't social networks, but are smaller groups where they're also talking to dangerous people or could be, or are, kind of grappling with what the new scene is and how to navigate that. So there's a lot of, I think a lot of kids that are okay, and then a lot of kids who are not, but it's not a success because it was always like that. Before they did the ban, there were lots of kids who were never encountering bad people on social media. Probably the majority. And then there were some who were. And so it's always going to be a diverse set of experiences that depend on a million things. The kid themselves, their own resiliency, their interests, who they want to talk to, whether they want to talk to a stranger or not in the first place, whether they're being bullied at school, and are those bullies tracking them down on their online lives when they're at home? There's all of these different elements that come into play, and they're still coming into play. So the only thing that's maybe real different is that some of the big high profile platforms now, I don't know, can moderate and regulate even less, I guess.
Now we don't have kids to worry about. Just go for it. Yeah.
And I mean, and then we're seeing things like what's happening on X. I don't know, is this really a coincidence when we're proposing that the good solution is to ban kids? It doesn't incentivize any of these companies to do anything better or moderate things or make things safer or more pleasant. And I'm with you. I don't want to see any of that awful stuff either. Like, so, I mean, I'm not on X anymore. As soon as it got bought by Musk, I was out, but like, I don't want to see that on YouTube either. Right. I want those controls and my ability to turn restricted mode. Like, I want to keep having those filters and those ways of moderating my own experience that are maybe made for kids, but are enjoyed by many people.
When do you know, or well, do you have any expectation when we would be able to know categorically whether the ban in Australia was a success or a failure? Or is that going to be an impossible thing to detect?
I mean, we'll have a sense of like adherence, I think. In the short term, it's easy to like not go on a social media for like a couple of months. So we'll see longer term, if compliance continues. So that'll be one way that they'll measure it. And then hopefully they will continue to talk to young people to ask them what their experience is and what they're doing instead. And if they feel any different, because the whole idea behind this was that social media was negatively impacting young people's mental health, right? That was like the source of much of this. It then rippled out to other things, exposure to violent content and advertising and persuasive design. So other things got brought in as like also reasons, but the main beginning reason was the perceived mental health crisis being caused by social media use. So like, are young people more mentally healthy? Is their mental health increased from the ban? Because I mean, we really need to start asking that. Is there any difference at all? Other studies done in other places have not shown that happens. So, and in some cases, it can actually be detrimental for mental health if the young person was using social media to stay connected with, people who are supportive, say like a marginalized youth in a community where they're not getting support in their households or in their local community, being able to connect with the community online, like having those things taken away can actually be detrimental, right, to mental health and well-being. So hopefully that's like a big impetus or a big focus of the research that they're doing. And I mean, longitudinally, we'll see, but I think this work is already underway and we'll start seeing things revealed at the 3-month point, at the 6-month point. We need to also be able to unmesh it from just that thing I was talking about before of like a thing I was used to doing, I'm not doing anymore, Yeah. Like I miss this thing I used to do, or I'm mad because I'm being forced to not do this thing I enjoyed. So those feelings can also come into play. So far enough away from it so that that's not a factor so much anymore. And like, are all the problems gone? Like in Quebec, where I live, they banned cell phones in schools, K to 12, like all the way through primary and secondary school. Is it actually resulting in improved test scores? Because that was the main reason. So we'll see, I think that one of the great kind of maybe catch-22s of some of these moves to regulate based on problematic evidence is that evidence was never rigorous or compelling in the first place. So it probably won't be rigorous and compelling down the road when you try to prove that the thing you did also resulted in what you claimed it was going to result in.
Well, because this actually brought me to a thought, because obviously there are loads of people, and I know you've been in various debates with people who are very pro bans and everything. And the typical argument that I see, which is pretty typical, is that, well, at least it's a start. Or it's best that we do something now, and then figure it out. But then again, my argument was that, well, then in that case, why didn't we ban access to social media like 10 to 15 years ago, because the problems, as you said as well, we're already there. We've seen all these issues. I mean, I started calling out all the potential risks of using AI as the editorial arbiter for social media as a potential danger back in 2014. The signs were there. So, but what would be your response to these people? Say, oh, actually, it's a start. We need to do something. Otherwise, what else do we do? There's nothing else to do.
Yeah. So I read about this in my book, actually, my previous book, Digital Playgrounds, around the video game violence controversies and the laws that were brought in around game ratings and game access. And what happened in that case might serve as a kind of like answer to your question, because they went all in on, really problematic research that claimed, without any actual evidence, that playing violent video games caused violent behavior and was turning kids into like murder machines, literally.
I remember. Yeah.
So extreme. All of these laws were brought in, all across the states and across Canada to impose, require game ratings to be enforced. So we were going to do age restrictions, and children under 13 were not going to be allowed to play the T-rated games, and children under, 17 or 18 were not going to be able to play the M-rated games. And this was like very, this was going to save the world because we were no longer going to have millions of murderers, right? It was going to be so great. The whole thing was based on like false conclusions, confusing a slight correlation with causation, interviewing or surveying university students about themselves as children, and then, generalizing that. So the research was very problematic, and, maybe people don't care about research rigor, but the thing is that link didn't actually exist. And parents knew it and kids did, so they didn't really abide by it. But they also joined in to companies and different people who opposed those laws. They said, these laws are too sweeping. How dare you tell me that I'm not allowed to buy a game for my 12-year-old just because it has, 2 seconds of someone smoking a cigarette in it, and so it was rated T for teen. Or my child is not afraid of these monsters that are cartoony. How dare you tell me how to parent? So, there was the public sentiment knowing that this wasn't actually happening. And then there was also the overreach of the law based on problematic evidence. And that was also causing these restrictions that were like over the top. And across the United States, every single state that had brought that in as a new law, new age restriction, was overturned, and even because of that, they then overturned the movie laws that had been on the books in some places for decades, that you weren't allowed to, come and see a movie that was rated M if you were a certain age. So it was the overreach did eventually swing back. But then what happened? No regulation at all. So you still have age ratings. They're not enforceable, but there's all this stuff that happens. Advertising, persuasive design, gamification into bringing in, online components, not well moderated, privacy rules being infringed. And it was almost as if because they had had the attempt to regulate, and that attempt was so poorly done, it was like, well, we can't really regulate this. We tried and we failed. So now let's just move on. And I call it like the regulatory standstill. And it is kind of that. When you get into these extreme positions, and those are the only two things that are presented as possibilities, it becomes like, oh, I don't want either of those things. But instead of doing something differently, the easiest thing to do is then nothing. It's then nothing. So what I'm worried about with this is, first of all, widespread infringement of children's rights to participate in culture, widespread, profound infringement of their privacy as they're being surveyed and recorded and tracked to see if they're breaking these rules. And then when these things eventually get overturned because they're so partial and they're so unlikely to actually result in the positive changes that the advocates say will happen, that then we'll have so much more of a challenge bringing in any kind of regulation at all that would actually tackle the problems. So that's my big fear.
Now that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it just, again, going back to the point that we've seen, how young people are skeptical about everything. So that just increased their skepticism about whatever future safety features, etc. I mean, we're already seeing that. I can't remember who published the statistic that one of the reasons that privacy has become such a big problem is because the younger generation don't care. Like, to them, it's like, what's the big deal? What's the big deal if you can track me? What's the big deal if you do this or that? I was like, actually, it is a very big deal, but they're just unaware of it, or they'll be like, I think the other thing as well, sort of, too many thoughts came into my mind. It's that element of trusting the system again, isn't it? It's like, to me, I feel that they might end up in a situation where they want to even rely more on AI companions, and we've already seen the consequences of that in terms of AI psychosis, which is now it's become almost an official term. But if they feel that, well, actually, okay, I can't access the web, or they come up with all these stupid rules, or now they're relaxing the rules. You know what? Screw it. I'll stick with my AI girlfriend or AI boyfriend, whichever, right?
Yeah.
And that's even worse. So to me, my concern, like with everything that you said as well, that now this just opens up the path, for AI companies to take advantage of this and push for this whole companionship nonsense, which, that's nothing to do with social media now. I mean, Grok is on social media, and I think that's why we're seeing these reactions. Well, OpenAI is not a social medium. Anthropic is not. So it's like, they seem to have, they've closed the window, but they've opened up the door for another potential storm without realizing it.
Yeah. I mean, there are a number of governments who are considering banning kids from accessing chatbots, which that's so confusing. Does that mean all chatbots? Like, even
exactly.
Bots, like, what does that even mean? It's this ill-defined concept. But I like to just circle back to what you said about privacy and kids not caring about privacy, because I don't think that that's the full story. I've done a lot of work, even like over the years. It's one of the main kind of things that I've talked to kids about, because I'm, talking to them about their rights in different online spaces, and privacy is a big one. It's one of the only ones that's also protected. So, it's a big one for policy making and policy intervention, but it's also a thing that young people talk a lot about. So they learn a lot about privacy in like digital literacy, media literacy classes, computing classes. It's confused in with safety, but it's something that that is like, that they're familiar with. So they have like a facility of talking about it. And they actually, over the years, including like really recently, the consultation we did for the UN, a big group led by Five Rights in the UK, actually, privacy for the kids that I talked to, we did 3 different focus groups. Privacy was their number one concern.
Wow.
3 months ago, I did a big forum, youth forum, for the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. It was a privacy commissioner, so obviously self-selection of the young people who attended, but they were so savvy about privacy, and we talked about it for 2 whole days, and all of them cared about it. But I think that what you're probably tapping into is that feeling of, what can we do about it, though? Everybody's collecting our data. I don't know what they're doing with it. I feel that they're using it against me, but I don't know what I can do, because it really seems, and like, I had the opportunity to talk about policy and design solutions to some of these problems with both sets of kids in both studies. It seems like it's always going to be a trade-off of either I give them everything or I'm not allowed to use it. It's such an all or nothing idea, you know? It's like, well, you don't have to have this app. If you don't say yes to letting them access your entire photo album, then you can't install it at all, right? So it's the all or nothing presentation. It's a huge pressure tactic of the industry to force us all to accept, right? These privacy policies in terms of service that are just ridiculous. And kids don't not care. They do, but they don't see what they can do apart from opt out completely. And that in so many instances is so undesirable, you know, that you don't get to play the game. Like, then you don't get to use a device. Then you don't get to do well at school. Like, what's the end game there? So, I was actually really pleasantly surprised for the UN consultation. Cause we talked to like all these kids and they were all these different ages, and group after group voted that the most important right that needed to be focused on by the United Nations and by governments around the world was privacy. This is not a group that don't care, but I think that they feel very helpless when it comes to, you know, protecting their actual data that they feel they should be able to protect. And then, you know, what are the options for them for being, having more privacy and being able to make better decisions moving forward. Not just like, okay, I won't play, but like, can you actually say yes or no? You know, can you play and not give them access to your photos? Is that ever going to be an option?
And these are the future consumers. So hopefully the companies probably would listen. I mean, you know, hopefully, I mean, as they grow up, they'll start demanding things like that.
Maybe, or by then they'll be completely trained in just giving up any hope of things being done differently. You know, my university age students are also not happy about their data being collected, but they're also very resigned to it. So, you know, that, or it's become so normalized that you no longer have any expectation of it. But that doesn't mean that we're happy with it, right? Like, just because we're used to something bad in our lives doesn't mean that we would prefer it to continue. It just means we've adapted to be able to move forward with it, begrudgingly or not.
You know, because obviously that's actually a great thing to know, that a lot of young people see privacy as their number one concern. But I'm wondering if this is to do with regions as well, because I would think that, for example, you know, young people in Florida might not feel the same way as young people, you know, in Montreal or in, you know, anywhere in Canada or anywhere in Europe for that matter, where privacy is something that is being taught a lot about at school. Not enough, in my view. I mean, I grilled my kids about privacy, this and that. They know what to do, but generally speaking, I wonder if you were to ask kids in certain countries, would they feel the same thing? I mean, does the data show any kind of discrepancy within that behavior based on regions, or did you actually see across the board?
We'll see. The report comes out in like 2 weeks. March 2nd is when we're releasing it. So, and this will be a comparison of dozens of countries. So we'll have a better idea. I mean, when we did the previous consultation in lead up to the General Comment 25. That was 27 countries, 700 plus kids. Privacy was a common theme, and it wasn't all defined in the exact same way. I would say the Canadian kids that we talked to in Canada had, you know, a lot of criticism of companies taking their data. I don't think that was as much the case in some other countries where you don't have as much access to technology, and it's just about just having access at all is like, this is my main concern. I want to have a computer. But then kids from kind of like developing countries were also more likely to talk about the government misusing data and how data privacy was important when you cross the border, so it also rounded out our picture of what privacy is as something felt interpersonally, vis-a-vis parents and friends at school, teachers and whatnot, but also something that was like political and something that was also commercial. So it was actually all together. When we look at like the kids of the world, it's not all the kids of the world. It's 27 countries, so it's still a tiny sample in comparison. But it gave us like a mosaic of privacy. It's like privacy matters in so many different ways, to mobility, to, whether you're safe from harm, whether you're being exploited by commercial entities, whether it's people at your school know private things about you that you don't want them to know, whether your parent is snooping, and finds out that you're gay before you're ready to tell them. Like, their privacy is defined as a cross-cutting right for this reason, I think, is so complicated as a concept. But yeah, when we talk to kids across ages, like 8 to 18 for these studies, they have a very diverse and comprehensive idea of it. Different things will be more higher concern for kids in some households than others, depending on like socioeconomic status as well as country. But overall, they have like a pretty good grasp of it, I would say.
That's great. And then that kind of brings us back to the bans, because obviously it will be interesting to see what they think about that, because obviously in order to enforce the ban, that's more of that private data that has to be shared with the big tech.
Yes.
More than ever before. And I'm not sure if people realize this. It's like, because I see a lot of debate and, arguments about it. And to be honest with you, I think you're the first person that I heard say it. That actually, by banning young people from accessing these platforms, you are literally giving away more of their private data. You're literally giving away more private data of your children, so that basically these companies can monitor them. Or somebody has to monitor them, because how do you police it otherwise?
Exactly. I mean, their data and everybody's data, right? If you have a platform that's now doing behavioral tracking of all users to try to find an underage user who is, bypassed the account creation moment, to try to see if the things that they say and do in the platform reveal a younger age than reported or classified as by the system. That's all of our data. So it is a total red flag, I'll call it that the very companies that make the vast majority of their money right now on data harvesting are rallying behind age bans or begrudgingly accepting age bans that will also give them even more data to harvest. It's like, it's a different type of data, but it's still a business model when you're trying to gather data, train AI models, or sell data to other people, use data for all these different purposes. I mean, all of the companies that are involved here have products across all kinds of genres, right? So, I think that the privacy as a necessary trade-off for safety is such a capitalist, rhetoric, commercial move. And really what we're seeing is like kids' rights being trampled on so many levels in the slight hope that maybe it will protect them from some harm.
Well, from what I shared on the Retort website recently, that I think it was just soon after, it was soon after Grok or XAI decided to not allow Grok to generate deepfakes of young women and children. Soon after that, when the Epstein files were released, people tried to use the same AI to uncover the faces of women and children in the images of the Epstein files, because obviously they're covered, they're redacted. So they wanted to use Grok to try to reveal these faces. So it's like, it's an example. Like, so again, unless you target the actual company, to look, you need to police that, or we'll go after you, Elon Musk, the CEO, or whoever that is the head of XAI or responsible for these decisions. You either monitor your people, or we're going to put you in jail, or we're going to prosecute you. I think that they'll be able to move it then. Because let me emphasize one thing, and I know I talk a lot this on the podcast so that people know who follow me, that when it comes to the world of tech, it's all about maximizing profit. It's typical, and again, this is not a political thing. It's just a reality. It's the libertarian approach to profit maximization, which means that you have to, at any cost, make more profit. It doesn't matter whether you generate more revenue or you cut corners. You make more profit, everybody's happy. If you cut corners and you made more profit, that's fine, right? So that's the reality. So, and because somebody also quite naively, I felt, they said that, by banning children and teenagers from accessing social media, that's a huge population that would probably impact their revenue. I don't really think it will impact their revenue that much. It's probably just a dent, but it's nothing that they could worry about, because at the end of the day, they're making money out of, well, a lot of their money is made out of fake bots anyway. So it's not like they care about, who's accessing it. So no, it's, I think it's ridiculous, but obviously it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But as a final thing, because obviously you alluded to the work that you've done with the United Nations. I mean, have you seen any kind of overall feeling from other colleagues within the United Nations in terms of the direction of play? What are their concerns in the future of privacy, the future of big tech? And of course, we are living in a world right now where it has to be called Trump's Silicon Valley. It's not the normal Silicon Valley anymore. It's Trump's Silicon Valley. What's their general outlook for the future in a world where effectively we're now in we are in control under Trump's Silicon Valley, but there's definitely Europe now are trying very hard to kind of isolate themselves for that. Obviously, Canada is doing the same. China's been doing that for a long time. So now China seems to be kind of flexing its muscle. I read somewhere as well that people are thinking that China could be the new Silicon Valley now. Like, people are actually trusting China more than the United States, which is, I guess, crazy. But this is the direction of play. But what sort of feelings did you see within the United Nations in your recent work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't hang out with the United Nations people. We send them our stuff. We're working through Five Rights Foundation and, many levels. But I'll tell you, when I go to conferences for children's rights and tech and speak to all of these different colleagues who are doing this work, it's still a really hopeful time. And part of that has to do with the fact that there is the General Comment 25 that confirms children's rights do exist online, and that has had quite a lot of impact in all kinds of parts of the world, not the United States so much. Apart from California and 2 other U.S. states, actually, who brought in age-appropriate design legislation very similar to what the U.K. has from the IPO, which is, rights by design kind of informed. So there are all kinds of different types of movements, I think, that are trying to bring children's rights to the forefront. And that's not something that we ever would see 20 years ago, 15 years ago. People just weren't talking about it at all. And even though there's this huge swing, in this other direction, and it is definitely interfering with what felt yay, victory momentum 5 years ago, it's interfering with it, but it's not completely effacing or replacing it. There are other countries in the world. There are many other countries in the world, and there are all these different countries, all across the global south, all across, Asia, Canada and Europe, that are trying to highlight and protect children's rights, that bring it into new regulation as it's brought in. So it doesn't feel hopeless. by like at all, actually. It feels like, oh, it's too bad. But then again, what we're calling for is a huge rethinking of how we do things. And of course, there's going to be pushback. And it's not that Trump is the pushback against children's rights. I'm not saying that. But kind of like some of the people who are going along with some of these more reactionary responses, or like age ban, kind of like these, like they're pretty radical responses in an important way. I think that that's sort of the pushback. That is the pushback. It's the regulatory pushback against having to consult children and take into consideration what their needs and wants are. And I think that to some extent, some companies are also part of that, because it's easier to pretend kids aren't using your website or your platform. Website. It's because I'm in my late 40s.
It's like, so 2010.
The old terms. It's easier to ban kids from your platform, or at least pretend they're banned, right? Than it is to actually implement age-appropriate design to different kids of different ages, because that's hard and expensive. So, like, it kind of makes sense as the counter movement to it. But on the other hand, that just kind of like shows how powerful the movement is, that it's attracting that much of a pushback. So I'm still hopeful. Like the EU still has it on the top of mind. The UK could, they were the ones that led the way with age appropriate design, and some of these like bringing kids into the consultation process. Like there's a lot of the groundwork has already been laid. It's just like, can we keep that going? Can we keep building in that direction?
And do you think it will happen? I mean, because obviously the movement has evolved now, and of course we're seeing all these pushback, etc., and silly laws as a maybe it's a starting point, but do you foresee a point where actually finally, the right regulations will evolve, and finally children will be put at the forefront of innovation, of children's safety, I should say, will be put at the forefront of UX design, innovation, and so on? Do you think that's going to happen sooner rather than later, or later?
Maybe later, but in the sooner, there are people who are doing it. There's companies who are doing it. There's organizations who are doing it, and there's governments that are, implementing it, or at least bringing it into their policies. So it's like, it's not a widespread thing, and that could take a really long time. But I like to focus on the people who are making those good differences, and kind of focus on like, how can these be the people who lead the way forward, as opposed to worrying too much about the old guard, trying to maintain their status quo and pushing us all out in the process.
Well, I'm actually a little bit hopeful. I'm actually hoping that because of Trump, funnily enough, in the same way that we've seen in Europe, for instance, that now they for the first time in history, I mean, because I'm one of the people that have been complaining about this, that they're far too slow in moving forward. But now they realize, actually, okay, maybe we shouldn't be that reliant on America anymore. We need to kind of pull our act together, you know what I mean? And I feel that because of Trump, and indeed because of Epstein, and the fact that all of these people that pretending that they want to protect women and children are part of the Epstein class, etc. I think that's in fact one of the reasons why I'm pushing this information out there repeatedly, because I want people to realize who's been lecturing them on safety, child safety. It's not the people that really care. So as you said, now that there are companies emerging and there are movements emerging, there are politicians emerging, they say, well, actually, no, we need to kind of change. We need to kind of start taking action. So, and of course, if people back them up and say, yeah, we'll help you to take that action. We'll vote for you, for example, or we'll choose your company over, the competitor or whatever. I mean, I think that could accelerate it. Like, that's my hope, maybe naively. But now I agree with you. There's definitely, there are new companies emerging. There's more companies. Like I always tell people that I refuse to bring in any shareholders or things like that, because unfortunately they're the problem. And I'm seeing more startups now emerging, doing the same. They say, well, actually, we don't want any investors. But of course, then the problem is that we don't have much money compared to
that is a problem.
That is the problem. So that's another thing. The funding needs to come from somewhere. So, governments, again, they need to start funding. I think, again, Europe, they're starting to put more money towards safer tech and that sort of thing. But again, I'm not sure if that's enough. I haven't seen any big numbers yet. So cool. But Sara, if people want to find out more about the work that you're doing, where can they go?
They can check out my lab website at kidsplaytech.com or kidsplaytech.ca, or read my book, Digital Playgrounds. I have a new book coming up, but it's still in the writing stage, so it's not going to come out anytime soon. But I have a lot of open access, shorter reports and publications that you can get from my website. So
cool. Yeah. And the links will be all in the description. And also, I will make sure that we publish the outcome of that UN report as well on the Retort, because I want to make sure people see it as well as much as possible. So guys, check this out. But Sara, again, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming over.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, great chat. Thanks so much.
Well, my friends, this is it. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before I go away, if you are on YouTube, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button below. It really makes a massive difference for the growth of our channel. And if you're following us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you need to give us a star review. Apparently, your following means nothing unless you give us a star review. Don't ask me why, but give us whatever star review that you think is fair. And if you're not following us, what are you doing? Come on, man. It doesn't cost you anything. It really makes a big difference. I really, really appreciate your support. But also, if you've got cash to spare, consider to become a founding member. We are an independent medium. We're not reliant on any kind of company that gets money from Russian oligarchs or any kind of weird sponsorships or anything like that. All of the companies that work with us are genuine companies that I know and I like. But ultimately, it's the members, you guys, our subscribers, our followers, our founding members, or those of you who actually just donated us like $1 here, a couple of bucks there, $5 there. All of that makes a big difference. This is what makes us truly independent. We're not chasing clickbait because we don't want clickbait. We want facts. We want the truth. We want something that we can all aspire to and something that truly make us at least work harder to make the world a better place. Not just talk about it, but actually make it happen. And of course, it supports all of our campaigns as well. So my friends, thank you so much. Much love. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.